Welcome everyone. Welcome to this webinar for health professionals interested in moving to New Zealand. My name is Fabian Maisonneuve. I am a licensed immigration advisor at New Zealand Shores. New Zealand Shores is an immigration consultancy with 3 offices in New Zealand, 1 office in South Africa. And we're essentially a large team of licensed advisors, and we've assisted over 21,000 migrants make the move to New Zealand since 2009. A little housekeeping. So there's myself today as panelist. We have a couple more panelists who will present a variety of aspects of moving to New Zealand. This webinar is being recorded, so anyone who registered will get the recording later on in case you get here late or have to leave a bit early. And we'll finish off the presentation with a Q&A. So there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to throw any questions down there and we'll reply in writing throughout the presentation if we get a chance. Otherwise, we'll try and address as many questions as we can towards the end. Our panelists today include Charlotte Stockman, my colleague and licensed advisor. Charlotte will provide some insights into the latest Immigration New Zealand updates and the upcoming changes. She will discuss visa pathways to New Zealand, essentially, including obviously the green list residence, which has been New Zealand's golden pathway to residency for health professionals for the last couple of years. But first, let me turn to our guest, Prudence Thompson. Prudence is a director at Accent Health Recruitment. And I'd like to know, Prudence, what you can tell our viewers about Accent and how your team can help them with securing a job in New Zealand.
Thank you, Fabian. So Accent is officially 21 years old in a couple of months. So we've been recruiting for New Zealand. We only recruit medical professionals and we only recruit into New Zealand, mainly permanently. And we've been working with NZ Shores probably coming up 10 years and really love it that we can talk about a CV of a doctor or a midwife or a nurse and you'll understand because we essentially speak the same language when it comes to migration. So we help medical professionals from all around the world come to New Zealand. It's a bit of an interesting time at the moment with ebbs and flows of different vacancies, but we're a free service and we work exclusively with our candidates who are coming here. And our clients really trust us and love us in the work that we do.
Thank you for this. Can you give me a brief update about job opportunities at the moment? What's in demand in your sector?
Sure. So currently nursing vacancies, we are actively recruiting and placing nurses into theatre, anaesthetics, mental health, and experienced practice nurses, so primary healthcare, GP, family nurses. It does vary throughout the year. I've been recruiting for 21 years actually recruiting for 29 years, but at the moment we had an oversupply of nurses the year before last, so we're just working through those budgetary challenges. We're actively looking for anaesthetic technicians, midwives, GPs, psychiatrists, surgeons, general physicians, a whole variety of doctors. Probably the most in demand at the moment would be GPs and theatre, anaesthetic nurses, mental health nurses, physios, OTs, social workers, speech therapists. There are roles, but you have to be super flexible on the location that you come to and be prepared to maybe work in an area that may not be your favourite area to start with and move into an area that you're comfortable in. So it does vary. We never say never, but we'll always help you. Even if we can't find you that right job, New Zealand Shores will be able to do your visa and we'll give you some advice on preparing your CV or resume.
Excellent. Thank you, Prudence. So for all of these positions that you mentioned earlier, there is going to be some kind of registration involved, right, with a relevant occupational registration body. What can you tell me about current registration timeframes for those key occupations and how you guys can help?
Sure. So anaesthetic technicians taking about 20 days to get registered from start to finish. Nurses taking about 20 days to get registered. Doctors, 20 days to get registered. Doctors are the only occupation that need a job offer to get registration in most cases. And then other occupations need registration to get a job interview. So doctors need a job offer first and other specialties need to get their registration before they have an interview. We've got a great need for sonographers. I've just seen that come up in the chat, and radiographers as well. So the registration process varies from each country. Each country is obviously different, amount of experience, and also the timing with different times of the year for the registration bodies if they're dealing with new graduates. And also there's influxes at different times of the year, and obviously they're away for Christmas. So registration is something that Kristen and Hayley are very knowledgeable at the registration process. And if you've got any curly questions, just put it, email info@accent.net.nz, and we can give you the specific information about the registration body you need. But you will need occupational registration for your visa.
Thank you, Prudence. Kristen and Hayley are part of your team, and they're helping with some of the questions that are already popping up in the background. Who do you typically recruit to? What kind of employers does Accent recruit for?
Yeah, so we're saying we recruit to public hospitals, so Health New Zealand or Te Whatu Ora. We also recruit to a group of private hospitals, private surgical hospitals, and general practice, palliative care. Pretty much anyone who has a vacancy, we will discuss what their needs are and guide the candidate and also the employer through the process. For example, if the employer needs to be an accredited employer, which they pretty much will do in most cases, New Zealand Shores can help with the accreditation and we help the candidate.
Awesome, great. Now, talking of ourselves, New Zealand Shores, I'm now going to turn to Charlotte, who will discuss essentially the key visa options for medical professionals, and then we'll get back to you both with a few questions. So I'll just share the presentation.
Awesome. So thanks, Fabian, and thanks, Prudence, for your wonderful little intro there. So I am one of the licensed advisors here at New Zealand Shores. And as Prudence mentioned, we've been working together for probably the better part of 5 years, if not longer now. So we are really well versed in what the immigration process looks like for healthcare professionals. So there's a few things we're going to go over today, which I guess are just the key parts to really think about with that visa process. So we're going to talk about how to prepare, and then our two main visa types, which you would look to consider applying for depending on your circumstances. So we've got our accredited employer work visa and our straight to residence pathway. So a little bit about us. We are a team of 12 licensed advisors. We were founded in 2009, so we've got 16 years of experience in the industry. A number of our advisors have what we call experience on both sides of the job. So what that means is they've actually worked for Immigration New Zealand and then gone on to become licensed advisors. So that gives us a bit of an insight into how Immigration New Zealand internally work, and it's helped our team develop a knowledge base that goes above and beyond what most licensed advisors would know, because we know those extra little things that immigration are going to look out for when they're processing an application. Our team is incredibly diverse, so most of us are migrants. There's actually only 3 of us in our team who were born in New Zealand, and that's our directors, Sarah and Alan, and then myself. So the rest of our team have migrated at one point or another, and most have also gone on to become New Zealand citizens. So they know what the process is like. They've done it themselves. They know what you're in for, and they know what an emotional ride it can be. As Fabian mentioned, we have offices in New Zealand and South Africa. So we've got 3 offices here in New Zealand. We've got our head office in Hamilton, and then we've got an office in Nelson and an office that we've just opened in Christchurch as well. So as Prudence mentioned, a key part of the process for all of you is occupational registration, and she will be able to tell you specifically whether or not that's something you should get started before you start looking for jobs. Generally it's a yes, but in some cases you may need to actually have that job offer before you can become registered. So definitely chat to her and her team, because they are incredibly knowledgeable in that space. A key part of the immigration process is documentation. So when you're applying for visas, it is a document heavy process. So there are things that you can start now to become prepared to make that process go a whole lot faster. And we can give you guidance in that space. Prudence and her team can talk through job search strategies depending on what your occupation is, and they can hold your hand through that process. So healthcare workers are the one industry which I recommend they just solely work with a recruiter if you can. It will make your migration to New Zealand a lot smoother, and she will be able to put you in front of the right people. So the first visa type we're going to talk about today is our accredited employer work visa. So this may be something we recommend, again, depending on your circumstance, but it is the one type of work visa that New Zealand has. Typically granted for a 5-year period, but can be granted from anywhere from 3 to 5, depending on, there's a few factors there. It could be length of your contract, it could be pay rate, but it generally for healthcare workers in most cases would be 5 years. An accredited employer work visa is tied to an employer. So what that means is your visa will say that you can work for a certain employer in a certain location and in a certain role. So it doesn't allow you easily to jump around, but it also doesn't stop you from changing employers if you decide you want to. There is a process called a variation of conditions that we can go through to change employers, but you do have to be mindful that with an accredited employer work visa, you can't just start working for another employer without going through that process first. It does allow you to bring your family with you into New Zealand. So when coming in on an accredited employer work visa, all healthcare workers will meet the financial threshold to bring their partners and children with them. So your partner and children will be granted a visa for the same duration as you are. So if you get a 5-year work visa, your partner will be able to obtain a 5-year partnership work visa, and your children will obtain 5-year student visas or visitor visas depending on their age. So children 4 and above, 4 up to the age of 19 are able to obtain student visas. Children under the age of 4 will obtain visitor visas because they're not yet school age in New Zealand. There's a few steps to an accredited employer work visa, largely tied to the employer themselves. So as Prudence mentioned, employers do have to be accredited. There is no exemptions to that, unfortunately, regardless of whether you're applying for a work visa or residency. And accreditation is basically a process an employer has to go through to demonstrate that they are a good employer. So Immigration New Zealand will have checked that they have no negative history in terms of employment law or immigration law. And there are steps that they have to undertake to remain compliant with Immigration New Zealand and to retain that accreditation. If you're looking at a job offer with Health New Zealand, well, Health New Zealand is effectively a government department, so they have maintained their accreditation and they do maintain it continuously. If you are looking at a private practice, for example, they may not yet have become accredited, or they may have potentially let it lapse. So there will be steps they have to go through to obtain that. An employer has to also provide settlement support and guidance to you. So Prudence and her team are actually really wonderful at doing this themselves, but an employer does also have to give you some settlement support when you arrive into the country, and that is part of them maintaining that compliance with Immigration New Zealand. The second step they have to go through is what we call a job check. So it's a bit of an interesting one for healthcare workers because it effectively is a labour market test. But we all know healthcare workers are in massive shortage in a lot of cases. So the employer doesn't actually have to advertise, but what the job check does do is it checks that the employment agreement and the job description are all compliant with employment law. So an employer has to actually undertake that job check before you can apply for your work visa, because the job check generates what we call a job token. And a job token is basically a special link that allows you to apply for your accredited employer work visa. So when you get onto that stage, your employer's done their accreditation, they've undertaken their job check, and you're moving through to the AEWV. You must have your registration at that point. So if you go and apply for a work visa or a residency visa without your registration being approved in some form, then your visa will be declined because it's a legal requirement to hold that registration to be able to practice in New Zealand. So that's one really key component that you can't skip over. You must also meet health and character requirements. So you must be able to demonstrate that you have an acceptable standard of health and character. And if perhaps you've got a few curly things, whether it be in the health front or someone in your family may have a criminal conviction, you may need to go through what's called a health waiver or a character waiver. So if you're worried you're in that space, please do reach out to us and we can give you some guidance around what that may look like. You may need to do an English language test. Again, unlikely at this stage for most healthcare workers, but there can be some cases that does apply. So again, we can give you guidance in that space if necessary. Cool. So onto our residency visas. There are two main options for healthcare workers. So, which generally we don't tend to recommend the second one, but the main visa that most healthcare workers will apply for is what we call our straight to residency visa. So that falls under our green list. The green list is just kind of a fancy term for what we call a skills shortage list. So it's a bunch of occupations. Healthcare workers fall into what we call tier 1 of the green list. So all of our healthcare workers are now in tier 1. And what that means is you can apply for a straight to residency visa. You can also you can qualify for the skilled migrant category, but it's typically a slower pathway to residence. So unless there were, I guess, unusual circumstances that you fell into that required you to go down that slower pathway, 9 times out of 10, we will recommend that straight to residency pathway for you. Cool. So the green list is technically broken up into 2 tiers, tier 1 and tier 2. So they are both full of occupations which are in demand in New Zealand, but all of our healthcare workers, as I mentioned, fall into tier 1. So there's 151 occupations under that tier 1 of the green list, and the vast majority of them are healthcare workers. The only healthcare worker that doesn't fall into the green list is our physician associates or our physician assistants, and they do have to go through that skilled migrant pathway. That may change in hopefully the short term. The government's just decided to recognise physician assistants and physician associates as a registered healthcare occupation in New Zealand, but it will still take some time for that to work its way through government. When applying for residence, you generally have to apply before the day you turn 56. We can assist with age waivers, so if you are outside that age bracket, please do reach out to us because we have been really successful with obtaining age waivers for healthcare workers in particular. Given the fact that you're generally so in demand in New Zealand, immigration tend to be pretty willing to grant that to you, but it does make it a lot easier if you are already under the age of 56. But again, please reach out. We've got an advisor that specializes in that space. You will need to demonstrate your English proficiency, even if you are from a country where English is your first language, and there are various ways of doing that. An English language test is required for people where English isn't the first language, and then if you are from a country where English is your first language, you can demonstrate your English proficiency through things such as your educational background or your work experience history. There are wage thresholds that have to be met, so you do have to be paid median wage or higher. So median wage at the moment is $31.61 per hour, but you, also have to be paid market rate. So if you're a doctor, for example, and market rate for your profession is, let's say, 200,000 New Zealand dollars a year, your employer's not going to get away with paying you just $31.61 per hour because that equates to about 65,000. So that's way below that threshold. So Immigration New Zealand will look at both of those factors. We don't tend to see employment agreements where any healthcare worker is being offered below market rate, and Prudence and her team will definitely fight to ensure that you are getting a good salary. So it's typically not something you need to worry about. There may be specific requirements for your role. So generally for healthcare workers, it is just that you hold your required occupational registration and then meet that median wage or higher. You don't tend to have to prove qualifications, with the exception of physician assistants and associates. They do have to demonstrate their master's degrees, but for everyone else, it is just a case of holding your occupational registration. So we've just got a little case study here. So the benefits to straight to residence is that you enter into New Zealand as a resident visa holder from the outset. And what that means is basically from the day you arrive, you have the same rights as a New Zealand citizen. So that's a really, really big benefit for a number of reasons. You can vote, you can enroll in KiwiSaver, which is our government retirement scheme, you can purchase a home, you've got full access to healthcare. So healthcare in New Zealand is basically free, and your children are entitled to free education as well. Where straight to residence can become really important for a family is if you've got children who are aged 19 or older, so 19 to 24, who are still dependent, they can actually then, the minute they're in the country, attend university. So university or any tertiary education falls outside our general free education in New Zealand if you come in on a work visa. Generally, if you come in on a work visa and you've got a child at that age, they would have to actually apply for a separate fee-paying student visa. So this would definitely be a case where we would 100% recommend applying for that straight to resident visa if you've got children in that age bracket. And your family are all included in the same application. So it's one fee per family, which can actually work out cheaper than applying for temporary visas, such as a work visa and partnership visas at the moment, depending on how big your family is. So just our case studies, we've got Vanessa, who's a GP from Singapore, and she would definitely apply for that straight to resident visa. That would be our recommendation, purely because it's going to process pretty quick, probably generally about 4 to 6 weeks, if not faster. We've seen them, I've actually had 2 straight to resident visas processed in about 10 days in the last few weeks. So they are really quick at the moment. And she can bring her whole family with her from the outset and enter New Zealand as a resident. Singaporean citizens can actually purchase property without having hold a resident visa, but it would still just yeah, that's a fun fact that I actually learned.
That is a really fun fact.
Yeah, they do still have to be ordinarily resident, but they can purchase property without holding a resident visa. So that's yeah, just something that's interesting to know. But regardless, our recommendation for her would be that she applies for that straight to resident visa. There are a few cases where we would potentially suggest people don't apply for a straight to resident visa from the outset. That maybe if you've got someone in the family with health or character concerns, we know that your visa is going to take longer to process just because you have to go through a waiver process. If you are from a country which requires a national security check. So we've got parts of the Middle East, big portion of Africa, and parts of Asia where Immigration New Zealand force those applications through a national security check, and they can take up to 9 months depending on which country you're from. It's not Immigration New Zealand that does those third-party checks. It's actually it is a third party, so it's they can't make it happen any faster, unfortunately. So there may be the odd situation based on you or your family that we would recommend applying for work visas first and then having residence process in the background. So from us, the next step that we recommend people move through is reach out to us for an eligibility assessment. Even though we've mapped out those pretty clear pathways, again, sometimes there are some curly things there, which would mean that we just need to take a bit of a closer look at your situation, and we can do that through our eligibility assessment. Once you've completed that, we can then book you in for a free 30-minute consult with one of our advisors. And then once you're happy to hit go, you can commence your migration process with us and in conjunction with Accent Health Recruitment.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlotte. I just have an interesting question here in the Q&A from Crystal, who mentioned they have a dependent child of 22 years. If I came over with a straight to residence visa and they were included on my visa, would they have to leave at age 24, or how does that work? Is the straight to residence a permanent visa?
Yeah, so it is. So your child doesn't have to leave when they turn 24. It's just that once So it's 24 inclusive. So it's actually up until the day they turn 25 that they can be included. They do have to be dependent, but it means that they can obtain residence with the whole family. And whether or not they even actually decide to live in New Zealand is up to them. They don't have to, but it is something that they will then retain for the rest of their lives. So a situation we come up quite often is kids, particularly in that age bracket, I guess from 20 to kind of 24, will often, families will often say to me, oh, they're at university in our home country and they're not actually that concerned. They're not actually that concerned about moving. Well, it's actually, if they're studying, they're generally classed as dependent, and it's actually worth including them in the application, because even if they don't want to move right now, they can obtain their resident visa. They only have to enter once to activate it. They can return home, continue living their life, and then they've always got the option to return to New Zealand for the rest of their lives. So it's definitely worth considering, even if your kid is potentially not that keen on the move. It's just opens up opportunities for them.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlotte. So now we're going to start some form of Q&A. I've got lots of questions for you too, but I just wanted to point out those email addresses down below. For anything visa or immigration related, please reach out to us at health@newzealandshores.com. Anything that is registration or employment related, you can contact the friendly team at Accent, info@accent.net.nz. Wonderful. Great. Now, Prudence. So we talked about the green list, right? The green list visa, which has been the golden pathway for the last couple of years. Would you say that it's made some kind of difference with the way employers see migrants, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So the employers in New Zealand have a lot more confidence in immigration, and they know that once you start the process, it's going to be weeks and not months. I mean, we don't want to overpromise, but it can take 4 to 5 weeks to get straight to residence, depending, absolutely case by case. But we find that employers are really excited when they get a CV from overseas now. They used to be a little bit hesitant because it could have taken 6 months in the past, but now it's a little bit less time and they've got more confidence in the overseas market.
Awesome. So thank you, Prudence. Charlotte, you mentioned roughly current process and timelines for the work visa or straight to residence, anywhere from 10 to 20, 25 days, substantially more if you're coming from certain parts of the world due to those national security checks, as they call it. So I guess this is where the NZ Shores team can advise on the right visa to apply for. Taking a step back a little bit from registration and employment matters, why New Zealand, Prudence? Why would you recommend that a health professional, working in the UK opts for some professional experience in New Zealand? What is so attractive about our country from your perspective?
Yeah, well, the feedback we get from everyone who's working here, and I myself have worked as a nurse in the UK, New Zealand, and in the Middle East. I think the work-life balance and the appreciation, respect from the community, the wages are still very doable and livable on a nurse's wage. They're well above the average wage. And I think the fact that it's family-friendly hours. I had a surgeon interviewed last week, and the employer said, if you want to be there for your son's first day of school or for sports days or certificates, and he'll probably get a whole lot of certificates, you can be rest assured that you get that work-life balance, which is pretty awesome. And you do find that people are really appreciated. There's on-site parking at a lot of the employment places and family-friendly hours. The process to come here, it is a challenge and there's a lot of paperwork, but it's absolutely worth it.
Awesome. Thank you, Prudence. Very good question. We probably should include this in the next presentation. Someone is wanting to check whether all of the visa pathways we talked about require a job offer. That's a yes, 100%. Whether you're going for the accredited employee work visa or the straight to residence or skilled migrant, you need a job offer. But Charlotte, what can you tell me about the working holiday visa, perhaps as a way to get a foot in the door?
Yeah, so the working holiday visa can be a really good option. So depending on which country you're coming from, can be granted from anywhere from 1 to 3 years. You do have to be under the age generally of 31 to apply. There are some countries where the scheme extends out to 35. Sorry, guys. But yeah, and what it means is it gets you into the country, you've got the right to work from arrival, and you don't have to have a job offer. The catch to it is you do have to be single, or at least not have any dependent children. So if you've got a partner who also meets the criteria for a working holiday visa, they can also come in on a working holiday visa. But if you have dependent children, they are not able to come with you. So again, we can kind of work around it sometimes, but that is case by case basis. So maybe that one person enters in on a working holiday visa and then partner and child travel on visitor visas, but that's case by case. So it can, Prudence actually emailed me about a working holiday visa yesterday for someone. So it can be a really good option just to get you here and starting work quicker. But there are some caveats that you should think about. You're not meant to come into the country with a permanent job offer. So the working holiday visa is really designed that you're coming to work and have a holiday. So just be mindful that if you have got a permanent job offer and you are looking at applying for the working holiday visa, you may get stopped at the border if you're questioned, just because you're not actually then technically meeting the whole point of the scheme.
We've had a couple of people who've got working holiday visas to start with, and then they get your help to get the residence. And obviously there's so many more advantages of getting residence in New Zealand.
Yep, absolutely.
So that sort of ties back to what I was saying earlier. It's really a way to get a foot in the country, but can you switch from a working holiday visa to a sponsored work visa while in the country if you find a permanent job?
Yeah, absolutely. And a number of people do go through that exact process. Some come out with just the intention to come out on their working holiday visa for a short period of time and then decide they love it and then decide to stay. So that's very, very common.
Okay. And once you're a resident, whether through skilled migrant or straight to residence, someone's asking whether it's then a 2 or 3 year process. Can you change jobs after you've been granted residency?
Yeah, so you're free to, once you've got a resident visa, as I mentioned, you've basically got the same rights as a New Zealand citizen or resident. So you're free to do as you please. You've got no restrictions. If you get 12 months into being a healthcare worker here in New Zealand and decide, I want to go be a strawberry farmer, well, you can. You've got full flexibility to do as you please.
Right. I see you flagged a question there, Charlotte, about the activation time to enter New Zealand if you're granted residency from offshore.
Yeah, so once a resident visa is issued, you actually have 12 months to enter and activate it. But if you have a job offer waiting, they're probably not going to wait 12 months. So you do have to be mindful of that, that even though you do have that big window, an employer has given you a job offer. And they do expect you to be turning up and starting that job offer. So definitely don't disappoint them, because it does actually ruin it for other migrants. If you accept a job offer, apply for your visa, and then never actually turn up to that role, it can actually really tarnish that employer, and we have seen it happen. So do just be mindful of that.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you, Charlotte. Now, Prudence, can you help me dispel a common misconception there? Someone is mentioning in the chat that they've been cautioned to work with a recruitment agency because they might take a portion of their income. How does
Yeah.
that work? How do you guys get paid?
Okay, so the employer does pay us. The employer pays us when you start work and stay in work. So we will only look for a role for you that you're going to enjoy and stay in. We would never find you just any old job. I have never, ever in 29 years had a salary impact on a candidate's recruitment process. So never has a candidate had a salary impacted because they came through us. Never, ever. At times, if it's a small GP practice, they may opt to use a recruiter, and they may not have budget to do all the flights and all the accommodation and all the support, the financial support. So they decide to use a recruitment agency. But we're really honest and transparent. New Zealand's such a small place that we would never, ever impact your salary coming through a recruitment agency. Yeah, and it's a common myth, but a myth it is.
Okay, good to know. So once again, the employer pays you as a recruiter to find the right skill set, and it's
Yes.
never taken off their pay or anything like that.
Never taken off their pay, and I've been doing this long enough that we've got a really, really good reputation in New Zealand and overseas. And if at any stage we have a nurse that's just general medical 2 years experience, they wouldn't have the right kind of skills and demand for an employer to pay a recruitment fee. So what we'd do is we would help out that nurse, and if necessary, we'd just let them go directly to the employer. But that would be, again, case by case.
Awesome. As a matter of fact, what we call paying for a job is a common scam, and it's illegal in New Zealand. So if you come across such too good to be true offers and they ask you for money to come to New Zealand, well, for a job, that needs to be reported to Immigration New Zealand.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one important step of securing a job is the interview. Okay, so I know, we assist with reformatting CVs. Accent does as well. They have some really good health professional oriented CV templates that they can provide. How do you guys help with the interview process? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so we've got a really good video and a list of questions that you're going to be asked during an interview. If you'd like a copy of these interview questions and this interview video, email us info@accent.net.nz and put interview questions in the subject line, and we'll reply with a copy of the common interview questions and a video tutorial. The interview, we say it's a bit like a date. You've got to be prepared, you've got to be on time, and you've got to look your best self. You've got to have a good background behind you, good technology, not being interrupted, and being prepared. If you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. So be prepared and have everything completely organized. Research the employer, research the role, Google the people who are interviewing you, because you might have worked at the same hospital or been at the same university. So if you can show interest, and if you want to go to Hamilton, for example, they might ask why Hamilton. So please do your research and say, well, we want to live in Hamilton because, and talk about what's going to be important with children for school, with your sporting, particular churches or clubs that you want to go to. So show some interest, be prepared. And we do a lot of interview practice beforehand. So we practice going through, and doing a video interview is about as much fun as doing a webinar. You've got to be prepared and be organized, and just, give it your best effort.
Great. Nice segue into my next question. So as a first step, you got your CV, then you tackle the interview, and then reference checking. Do candidates need to prepare for this, and what's the process there?
Yeah, so referees need to be recent, professional, and comprehensive. So pick a referee, for example, your manager or your past manager, someone who's going to be prompt, someone who's going to do a comprehensive reference and write all the questions, and someone who has good standing. So, for example, a peer is okay to use, or a colleague is okay to use, but you also need a current or previous manager as well. So just make sure you've got good referees, even up to 4 referees, with their email address, the duration, and your relationship.
Excellent. I'd like to talk about money then. Registration, how much does that cost? How long is a piece of string, really? But what can ballpark?
Ballpark, I would say around an average of 500 New Zealand dollars, depending on the occupation. Nurses may have to go through CGFNS. Midwives have a different process. Everyone is quite different. And that brings me on to registration. If you're looking for registration information as a midwife, send me an email that says registration information midwife, or registration anesthetic technician in the subject line, and we'll send it to you, or registration doctor, and we'll send it to you. We've got all this information ready at hand. So each registration process is quite different as far as the references they do or do not require, documentation and timing and process.
Great. Now, registration is something for the candidate to cover, but once they're in New Zealand working, and in most cases they have to pay for a practicing certificate every year or every 2 years, is the employer usually paying for this?
Yes, the employer pays the annual practicing certificate, or APC, as we shorten it down to, and you need your APC to start work. And that generally takes about 5 working days for most of the occupations. Once you're registered, you want to have it a good couple of weeks before you're ready to start work. Every occupation is different. Doctors get their APC in New Zealand. All other candidates get their registration a couple of weeks before they're ready to start.
Great. Would a prospective employer contribute to any of the relocation costs? We sometimes refer to this as relocation allowance. What's your experience?
2 years ago, they paid a lot of money, a lot. Change of government, they don't pay so much. We've had recently a couple of nurses offered roles, and they've been given 5,000 or 6,000 New Zealand dollars towards the flights. But again, it depends on the employer. Expect and prepare that they're not able to offer you anything. And if they can offer you anything, they can, that will be a bonus.
Excellent. Charlotte, question for you, still talking about money matters. What can a candidate expect to pay when applying for visas? First case, they use an immigration advisor. Second case, they decide to do it themselves, work visa versus residency. What are the considerations about money spent there?
Yeah, so we don't actually quote on a, I guess, a one fee fits all model. We do tend to quote depending on your situation. Typically, our fees would range generally between about, and this is in New Zealand dollars, for a straight to residence application, probably about 3,800 to 4,500. The upper end of that is obviously if you need a health waiver or a character waiver. If you've got something extra curly with your situation, that quote may go higher. The Immigration New Zealand fee for a straight to residence visa is 6,450 New Zealand dollars. So both our fee and the immigration fee are per family. So you don't pay per person. Some people do get a bit confused with that because Australia charges per person, but we are per family, which, as I mentioned, can actually make the straight to resident visa application cheaper than what it can be to apply for temporary visas. You know, if you're a family of 5, for example, and you're applying for 5 temporary visas, you're pretty much at the same cost as a straight to resident visa anyway. If you're looking for assistance with the accredited employer work visa, our fee for that is 1,800 New Zealand dollars, and then we charge per person for that because each person requires their own application. So a partner, we charge 800 New Zealand dollars, and then children are an additional 400 New Zealand dollars per child. So you can see how it can start to get more expensive than just applying for residence outright. Government fees for the temporary visas, so an accredited employer work visa is 1,540, a partnership work visa is 1,630, and dependent children are 750 per child. I know we've got a lot of people from the US in our webinar today. You lucky things actually get a fee waiver for temporary visas only. So that means that Immigration New Zealand actually completely waive your temporary visa fees. So that's a bonus if you do have to go through that pathway. And some people are using that to just apply to ensure they can get here quicker and then apply for residence in the background just because there's no cost attached to them. But that fee waiver doesn't apply to every single country. So there are a number of countries. Our UK friends, for example, unfortunately, you do have to pay the immigration fees. So case by case basis on that one. Typically, everyone has to pay the resident visa fee. There's only a very, very small number of quite random countries that don't have to pay the resident visa fee. It's not something I see very often.
Excellent. Now, jumping topics a little bit, but I've seen this popped a couple of times. What about children with autism spectrum disorder? I know there were some news in the immigration space about this topic earlier this year. Charlotte, can you say a few words about this?
Yeah, so I flagged that one to answer live. Unfortunately, it's not a one answer fits all. So, as anyone with an autistic child will know, there's a big spectrum there, and it depends where on that spectrum your child sits. So, if your child requires a lot of assistance in the classroom, or they require a teacher aide, or they're perhaps not even able to attend a normal school, or they're not achieving at this standard level, chances are a visa may be declined. If your child or children are in a standard school and they're basically attending at a normal level and require minimal assistance, then chances are you will get a visa, but it is very much case by case. So that is something that we really recommend you reach out to us, because if you do have an autistic child, regardless of where on that spectrum you are, you're going to need a health waiver. So unfortunately, it's not the easiest question to answer in a format like this, but I would recommend that person to reach out and we can discuss that further.
Thank you, Charlotte. Still on the topic of family, I have a couple of questions about what family actually means. For a partner, do you have to be married? What about kids from a previous marriage, previous relationship? How does immigration view all this?
Yeah, so you don't have to be married, but you do have to be able to demonstrate that you've been living together in a genuine and stable relationship. So for residents, the threshold is that you must provide evidence of 1 year. So you must be able to prove that you've been living together at the same address for 12 months prior to that application. If you can't do that, Immigration New Zealand will either defer or decline the application. So that's just one thing to be really mindful of. There's no threshold really attached to like a partnership work visa, but we tend to work on a threshold of a minimum of 2 to 4 months. And in some cases, it could be longer. Again, case by case, not everyone's situation is the same. In terms of children, so you can include children that are biologically yours or children you have adopted. For temporary visas, they can get visas up until the age of 19 inclusive. They can get a student visa up until that age. For residents, they can be included up until the day they turn 25. You cannot include siblings, parents, nieces, nephews under that straight to residence application. If you've got parents that you want to bring with to New Zealand, then that's a whole nother webinar. But New Zealand Shores does have some great videos online that you can go and watch where we discuss those options. If you've got siblings wanting to migrate or children that are older than the age of 25, they will need to migrate under their own pathway.
Thanks, Charlotte. Parents is indeed a whole other topics, but it is an important consideration for people wanting to move as are they going to be able to bring their parent? Are they on a permanent or temporary basis? There was an announcement yesterday, a rather big one. Charlotte, would you like to say a few words about the Parent Boost visa?
I would love to. I'm very excited. So this actually came a lot earlier than what we thought it was going to. Government had signaled we were going to have it by the 30th of November, but the announcement came yesterday on Sunday, New Zealand time, that from the 29th of September, people are going to be able to apply for what's called the Parent Boost visa. It will initially be granted for a duration of 5 years, and you will be able to apply for a second visa to allow a maximum of 10 years in the country. Parents will have to meet health and character standards. Again, if your parents are in kind of their 70s, 80s, Immigration New Zealand's not going to expect them to have the health of a 30-year-old, but they are going to have to be able to demonstrate that they're not going to end up in residential care or hospital. They will have to hold an insurance, which does cover any healthcare requirements, and there are sponsorship requirements. So you as the resident or citizen child will have to be able to either demonstrate you have a certain level of income, or your parents will have to demonstrate that they have a pension, which is the equivalent to a New Zealand pension in terms of funds, or they will have to demonstrate that they have a certain amount of money in their bank accounts. They don't have to meet all three. It is just one of those three. So it is actually really flexible policy. It is worth noting it is just a visitor visa though, so your parents can't work, and there is no pathway to residency directly from that visa. If they do want to then apply for residence separately, they'll need to explore pathways really to what that may look like for them. And they will really need to make sure that at the end of that visa that they have, I guess, the means and the ability to return to their home country.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlotte. I really see this as a wonderful, flexible way for grandparents to come and visit their grandkids on a regular basis without having to worry about any kind of multiple visa application. I mean, 5 years times 2 visitor visa, it is unheard of. And it's got to be one of the most flexible immigration schemes in the world to allow specifically for grandparents to come in and visit their grandkids. So I think it really goes to show how family oriented New Zealand is as a country. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Someone was talking about tax resident status. Can you say a few words about this, Charlotte?
Oh, I'm not an expert, but I see the question there is basically, if I work for 1 year, would that make me a tax resident, and do I need to pay taxes? Well, yes, you need to pay taxes while you're working in New Zealand. No way to avoid that. It's actually taken by your employer. So we have a scheme called PAYE, or pay as you earn, and your employer will actually deduct your tax out of your paycheck and pay your tax to the New Zealand government on your behalf. So you can't avoid it. And yes, you would be deemed a tax resident after being here for a year, but again, I'm definitely no expert on that. So there may be some situations where you need to seek advice from an accountant.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
have a really good accountant who specialises in tax matters for immigration people, called Julia. And if you want to get her details, I can email them to you. So just email me.
Sounds like we need Julia's details as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, there are many considerations. As one of them is if your country has a multilateral agreement in terms of tax as well, so you don't double dip or don't get double taxed. So it's an important one. Prudence, what are the considerations that we need to keep in mind when relocating to New Zealand, when picking a region or a type of employer? What do people need to bear in mind?
I guess it's absolutely a personal preference. People say, where should I live? Now, we live in Christchurch in the middle of the South Island, you're Hamilton. It depends on your children's schooling or sporting or cultural needs. You know, are they big musicians? Are they into a particular sport? Do you like surfing or skiing? New Zealand, it's interesting. Most cities offer a bit of absolutely everything. If you're in a smaller area, they may not have the population to support, you know, ballet classes, for example. There might not be a local guitar school. You know, there might not be places that you might have to travel a bit more. But look at you. Tell us where you're living at the moment, what your motivation is to come to New Zealand and what you want to get out of the whole process. And we will say, hey, this place looks really great. My colleagues, Kristen and Hayley, have lived in Auckland and Tauranga. I've got family from Invercargill and family in Nelson. So look, depending on where you're at in your stage, children or no children, sport, and what you're looking for, we can help out with that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Prudence. One question I've seen, not in this particular case, but on several occasions before, and I'd like answers from both of you, please. Fresh graduates, what are options in terms of employment prospects or registration capability, getting your license as a medical professional, and if not, perhaps further tertiary studies as a plan B?
Fresh graduates, we wouldn't be able to get registration until they have at least 12 months, and to be favoured to get to the top of the interview list, 2 years, potentially 3 or 4 years experience in their home country. So if we had a new graduate come to see us, we'd say, stay, work at your own home for 2 years, and then come across, depending, of course, on your situation. If your husband was this is a case I had last week, the husband was a GP, the wife was an anaesthetic technician who'd only had 6 months experience. I said, stay for another 6 months and then we can get you a limited registration or limited scope of practice when you arrive in New Zealand. The GP started work immediately. The anaesthetic technician wife had a limited registration, more of a new graduate or trainee job in New Zealand. So very much case by case, but we'd love you to have at least 2 years before you come across.
Awesome. And for those who are literally out of school, Charlotte, would tertiary studies in New Zealand be an option at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a number of what we call fee-paying student visas for people. So I actually had a nurse recently who was a pretty fresh graduate. She didn't have the required number of years work experience to obtain registration in New Zealand, and she actually opted to come out and study a Master of Nursing in New Zealand. So that then led into her led into a nursing council registration here in NZ, and she was able to, I guess, kind of fast track that process. It can be expensive, so coming to study as an international student in New Zealand isn't necessarily the cheapest way to get here, but if you have the funds available, in some cases it can actually be cheaper than doing a master's degree in your home country. So that is something worth considering. If you are looking at master's level in particular, you can then actually obtain post-study work visas, which are open work visas and give you the right to work for any employer, which can make, again, job searching a little bit faster. So definitely, if that's something you're interested in, please do reach out. New Zealand Shores are education agents for the vast majority of education providers in New Zealand. And what that means is we can actually offer our students service for free, as those universities will pay our service fee, but we do have to enroll you. So if you go and enroll yourself, then they won't cover our service fee. But if we actually also manage your enrollment, then they will.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, very important. That student pathway is a fantastic way to get into New Zealand and really work towards a deadline and map out your migration carefully. I saw a few questions pop for nurse practitioners, Prudence. I believe we tackle that subject at every webinar we do, but what's the current process for someone working as an NP or overseas to register here and come and work?
Yeah, so nurse practitioners have to go through quite a long process. The degree and the training level of a nurse practitioner in New Zealand is a lot higher than overseas, I understand. So you would come and work first as a registered nurse, and we've had a load of nurses that have worked as a registered nurse first and then go on to do their nurse practitioner registration, so you get recognised as a nurse practitioner. It's not an easy process, and we're hoping it will get easier. There's been a lot of funding by the government into GP and nurse practitioner employment and support. So what we're finding is nurses do work as a registered nurse initially and then go on to build up to a nurse practitioner. So it isn't ideal that you can't start working immediately as a nurse practitioner. But to be honest, you won't know what ACC is. You won't know about the MedTech computer program. You won't know a lot about the New Zealand culture. So take your time to learn it as a registered nurse and then build up to your nurse practitioner status. There is a bit of a culture shock, even though we all speak English. There's a lot of differences in our care of patients in our community.
Thank you, Prudence. So I guess we've got a few minutes to wrap up. Talking of culture shock, can you tell me about the challenges people potentially face about moving to New Zealand, and conversely, the best things about New Zealand? And then I'll finish off with Charlotte with the same question.
Yeah, look, culture shock's an interesting thing, and it hits you when you least expect it. Even though you've been here before, you might have lived here years ago as a student, you've visited a lot before. If you never have, there are things that will challenge you on a daily basis. The weird things like different aluminium foil or tin foil, different tomato sauce, your favorite, coffee not being available. There was we caught up with a couple of American ICU nurses we'd recruited recently who were just wonderful, and they said the toilet paper's different, and I said okay. They said they'll get used to it. But the cool thing is, they said they've worked in intensive care, I think, for about 16 or 18 years, and they'd never shaved a patient, a male patient who was in intensive care. They'd never had time to give a face shave. Is that what you call it, Fabian? A shave to a patient, because they'd never had time to do it. So they had to learn how to use a razor or a electric razor. And they also went into the shower with the patient, took the shower, who was in intensive care, pretty unwell, into the shower and wore gumboots. So this was two firsts for a nurse. They wore gumboots and they'd shaved a patient. So there's lots of really, really different things. The way that New Zealanders speak, the word crook. So Charlotte's quite crook at the moment with her cold. That's a good Kiwi term that we use frequently. And I'm going to spew, my puku's sore. Just understanding a lot of the small colloquialisms is a bit of a culture shock. It's hard being away from family. It's hard with the time zones. But now with technology, you can pick up your Skype or Zoom or WhatsApp and chat to people pretty quickly. And people find that the benefits, the safety, no gun drills at kindergarten or at school, the fresh, beautiful food that we have, seasonal, I might add seasonal, because you don't want to buy fruit and veg out of season in New Zealand. Or oysters, to that matter. There's a lot of things that will surprise but also delight you. And the people, always the people. People comment on the people.
Great. Charlotte?
Sorry, I was just trying to answer a question in the chat and
speak. It's a really good one, actually. Yeah.
It is a good one, so I might answer that first, actually. We've just had a question pop up in the chat that says, can you make 2 separate applications for straight to resident visa as a married couple? While including each other? Yeah, you can't. So there'd be very little reason why you would. Well, you can, I guess technically you can, but there'd be very little reason why you would, to be honest. If you both meet, all of the eligibility criteria, you both have a job offer, and you both meet partnership evidence, I would really just recommend that you pick one of you to be the principal applicant, because submitting 2 applications is going to cost you almost 13,000 New Zealand dollars, and there's just kind of really no need to. The only time we'd typically recommend people submit 2 separate applications is perhaps if you had each had a job offer but didn't meet partnership criteria for whatever reason, and then maybe you'd submit 2 separate applications, but otherwise it would just be money wasted, really. An application's not going to process any faster if it's a single applicant versus a couple, so there's no difference there, really. Why I love New Zealand. I have grown up here. I haven't lived anywhere else in the world, but I have been lucky enough to travel a lot, and there is nowhere else in the world I would want to live. I mean, I love going on holiday, but by the time I kind of get to my end of my second week, I can't wait to come home. I love how safe New Zealand is. I love that I can walk out my door and go running and not have to worry about anything. I could go off and walk a bush track by myself and not have to worry about anything. Life here is definitely at a different speed. So I do get a lot of clients who say to me it's almost like going back in time. We are 2 big islands. Well, actually, we're 3 big islands. So we are to some degree on island time. And that is something you will need to get used to. Things close at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. We don't have necessarily 24/7 shopping. So there are adjustments to make, but it does mean that life is a little bit slower. You can really enjoy, life outside of work. You're not going to be working crazy hours or lots and lots of shifts unless you really want to. So yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to living here, but I think there's more pros than cons.
Right.
Yeah, I second you that, Charlotte. I've been with work to the US, UK, Netherlands, Singapore, and going to South Korea next in a couple of weeks. And absolutely, I love traveling. I love traveling New Zealand, but I love coming home. And it's as soon as you get to customs, if no one has been here, the first interaction with customs is, oh, g'day, how you going? Oh, you've come to work here. That's good. What kind of job have you got? Not quite in that accent, it's probably a bit better, but it's a pleasure for us to hear when I say to someone, how was your flight? How was your arrival? And how's your Airbnb when you first arrived? And, we touch base with people when they arrive, before they start work, after they start work. And it's all really, really positive, which I love.
I agree 100%. Thank you so much. We going slightly over time here, so we'll wrap things up. Thanks again for attending this webinar. It was recorded, so we'll circulate the recording to you guys. Apologies if we haven't been able to answer your questions. We will make a point at reaching to every one of you, and we hope to engage with you further and start working on your relocation. Thanks a lot, Prudence. Thank you, Charlotte. Bye.
Thanks, Fabian. Bye, Charlotte. Take care.
See you later.